Hello and welcome to this webinar, The Role of Senior Leadership in Public Sector Digital Communications. Now, as we sit here and watch this, and for those of you that are watching live or in the immediate days afterwards, we've just come out of a storm, probably the fourth in as many weeks, and also tackling our first confirmed case of coronavirus in the Republic of Ireland. So I can imagine that those working in digital communications in government in Ireland that are affected by both of those crises are extremely busy and probably not here watching it live, but may watch the recording. Now, as many of you will know, I've been working directly with public sector marketing pros on this topic probably for about 2 years, but for many years before that, but 2 years very, very focused. But I've come to learn from you guys that really it's senior leadership who now need to step in and to join the conversation that I've been having with those working in marketing or comms or in social media for the past number of years. You see, very often the pushback that public sector marketing pros are getting is from senior leadership in terms of there not being a full awareness of how important digital communications is, the scope and the scale that is needed in order to transform and to move your comms from mainly traditional to be digitally agile. And then thirdly, the whole conversation about investment in training, investment in resources, as in perhaps new hires, and then of course, investment in terms of money when it comes to new platforms or to new technology. So I really want this webinar to be 60 minutes that a senior leader takes to just reflect and consider the role that they must be playing in the digital age. We're now in 2020, and unfortunately many of the conversations that I am having with government and public sector, and not just in Ireland, but around the world, is that do we need to be on Instagram, for example? What's the pros and cons of us having a Facebook page? We're still having those conversations, despite the fact that we know that in Europe alone, over 50% of people are getting news and information from social media. So most people know me who are going to join this webinar. I've been working in comms my entire life, but as I said, have specialised in government communications and marketing because I believe in the public interest and I believe in the truth. And that probably comes from my days as working as a journalist. And one of the first things that you're taught is that you check your sources, you check them again, and then you check them a third time. And the advent of social media and even listening to conversations over the weekend and this morning, as I've been tuned to radio, was that what about the fake news that is spreading around the coronavirus? And indeed, there was a doctor from the World Health Organization who said last week that we need a vaccine against fake news because it's spreading like wildfire. Such is the challenge facing government communications. Indeed, I just tweeted this morning from JS Tweets Digital about 2 Instagram accounts that I found called Coronavirus Ireland and Coronavirus Ireland 2020. Not sure who's behind those accounts because they don't really identify themselves. And so us being able to choose a single source of truth is really, really important in times of public crises and of course in times where public health is to the fore. But I tweeted it and then the fake accounts, well, the anonymous Twitter accounts started responding to me and said, I don't believe our government, I don't believe our health service. A lot of anger there. But I believe we have a collective responsibility to ensure that we as communicators and we as leaders stand up and understand how conversations are taking place across social media. We are in 2020. There's a sense of a complete evolution of the world of comms in our work, but we are living in the S3 age. And this is a term that I coined in my book, Public Sector Marketing Pro. And the S3 age is an age where we are essentially succumbing to the power of the citizen journalist. I was having a conversation with my 24-year-old daughter last week, and she was talking about trying to find some recipe books for Tamil cuisine, which is a native cuisine from Malaysia. And she said that she couldn't find any when she went to Google search. And I said, oh, okay, but are you searching the hashtags on Instagram? And she says, yeah, and that's where I found much more information. So you can see how there's been a generational shift in where young people are getting their news and information. So the S3 age is made up of three key pillars. It's search, and search is essentially Google as the biggest search engine in the world, but also it's YouTube as the world's second biggest search engine. That's where we're getting one half of our news and our information. The second half then is from social. So it's from Facebook, it's from Instagram, it's from Twitter, it's from LinkedIn, and it's also in those private groups. WhatsApp, as we know, is owned by Facebook. But then finally, all of this news and information and this access to it is being driven by the smartphone and the free availability of Wi-Fi. So this is the recipe that is driving digital communications in 2020, and it's not going to stop. It's only going to grow in importance for the citizen who you want to engage with, but it's also going to grow in responsibility from your staff who you are leading. So you have to get into the mindset as a senior leader of understanding the S3 age and making sure that you are agile enough to be found on search, to be responsive on social, and to have your content totally mobile optimized and being shared in real time when people expect it. So when I deliver Google's mobile masterclass, they have access to, I guess, the activities of 1 billion people at any one time across their 6 media assets. And there is an insatiable appetite for news and information. And unfortunately, if you aren't providing it, then citizens are going to go to a source that is providing it, whether it's true or not. Okay? So you need to be agile enough in order to be set up for the S3 age. Every year, Edelman produce the Trust Barometer. Now, this is a global study of trust and sentiment towards government institutions, towards the private sector, towards the non-profit sector, and also the media. And unfortunately, trust in government is dropping. It's dropping, and that is not good news for you guys, but it's also not good news for citizens, because when trust is broken, fear is spread. And fear is almost like the symptom of mistrust. And it's really, really important that government agencies build up trust and transparency. And if we look at the 2020 study, it reveals that despite a strong global economy and your full employment, okay, so that should mean that citizens and populations are full of confidence, the opposite is indeed true. So none of the 4 societal institutions that I mentioned in the study is trusted. And in fact, when it comes to government trust, you fit into the sphere that is described as incompetent and unethical. Now, they're quite damaging and stark descriptions. And as people who are working in government and public sector, you know, how does that make you feel? And I think it's an indication that we need to take trust and transparency even more serious than we have before, because in the absence of trust, then you're going to have a vacuum, and those that are going to stand into that vacuum are going to take advantage of the fear that populations and citizens are experiencing. And we can see that with the spread of fake news around the coronavirus. So let's have a look at the key graph that is putting you in that quadrant, if you like. So the 4 dimensions of trust. You have competence, and you have ethics, and then they break them into unethical and less competent. And if you see the bottom left-hand quadrant on my screen here, it says government and media are sitting here, being less competent and being most unethical. You see NGOs are sitting up at being ethical, but less competent. And you can see business are seen as competent, but non-ethical. But we have nobody who's seen as ethical or competent. So this is a huge worry. I'm not even going to get into, who's to blame or what's to blame. Suffice to say that I believe that the increasing spread of fear and misinformation is leading to this vacuum that is being filled by bad actors. So who are these bad actors and what are their goals? Well, you have people who are driven by populism, perhaps propaganda, who want to sway political opinion and political views. You have people who are driven by money, and that will always be around. So as we know, the more clicks you get, potentially more money you can make, because clicks, eyeballs and attention online gives you something that has commercial opportunity. The other thing to say is that when there's a vacuum online, it is going to be filled. Make no mistake. Over half the world's population are now online. They're using social media. There are more smartphones in the world than there are toothbrushes. And the free availability of Wi-Fi is extending right across the globe to all markets, to all countries. When we go to social, when we go to search, using our smartphone, we have an expectation that the information that we want right now is going to exist. So let's say, for example, I've just traveled back from the UK. I understand that there's been a case identified in Scotland. I was there over the weekend. I come back, I go to my smartphone and I say, what should I do if I've recently traveled to Scotland that has a case of the coronavirus? I am expecting my exact answer to be there, to be answered. I don't want a link that brings me to 3 other pages. I want the answer there. And I'm actually going to click on probably the first or the second search results and the link that I get. And, I'm somebody that understands the web, that understands the internet. I'll look at the URL, I'll look at the source of truth, but most people don't. Most people don't have the knowledge that I have, and they don't know perhaps what is true and what is not true. The other thing to say is that that's my search activity, but now I'm going to social and I'm getting WhatsApp messages. I'm in particular groups. People are sharing screenshots. There's no source of that screenshot, and I'm unsure of where it's coming from. But that information, whether true or not, is making me confused, and maybe it's making me a little bit fearful. You multiply this by 500,000 people in Ireland right now, perhaps, who are unsure or who are confused and who can't get their questions answered. You then go to a younger demographic who don't listen to the national broadcaster like I do, who doesn't consume news probably 4 or 5 times a day, who probably goes to the website of truth. And this is where we have the problem arise, okay? And when the citizen voice gets bigger than the government voice, then we are posed with another problem. It's not only the fact that you need to be on these channels, but you need to have maximum share of social voice for the content and the story that you are driving. So let's have a look at the digital communications landscape as to how I see it for government and public sector. So let's put yourself at the center of this circle. You're a government or a public sector agency. You need to be creating the digital content that is going to drive the narrative. The National Health Service in Ireland, the HSE, is the single source of truth. And then the global one, you have the World Health Organization. I watched a live stream on LinkedIn this morning from the EU Commission, from the DG Health. So I've been getting my news from the single sources of truth in my country, also at a European level, and also at a global level. but I knew exactly where to get it because I physically searched for those three agencies on web and on social. But I'm not a typical example of how a citizen would explore the web. What they're going to do is they're going to put in their question. So what you need to do is you need to set out every single question that a citizen is possibly going to ask about whatever crisis or campaign that you are driving right now. Social media also is a great friend in terms of listening, because there are always going to be questions and opinions that are shared that you haven't thought of. So you need to be following those conversations, whether it's false or true information, whether it's valuable or complete crazy questions that people are putting to you or putting to anybody else online. Listen to conversations, because what you need to be doing is correcting the record and driving that narrative. And the only way that you can drive that narrative is to publish content. And in times of crisis, the pieces of content that you should be driving and utilizing right now are actually live streams. You know, I want to see far more live streams coming, because when I see a live stream happening, I know there's a sense of urgency and importance. And also the algorithms are going to up when you have a live stream. So we've also seen that there is a definite move away from consumption of news from traditional media to online sources. The EU average is about 53% of people consuming news digital first from social media. So that's Twitter, that's Facebook, that's Instagram, now it's TikTok. I see the World Health Organization in the last number of days have joined TikTok, the video storytelling app, in order to reach younger audiences. And if you think about the first case of coronavirus in Ireland, it's actually impacted a second level student. So you can see, where is that demographic going to get their news? They're probably not listening to the national broadcaster. They're being influenced by their parents and their peers, but they are hanging out in different social networks. And that's why you need to be looking at the social networks. And this is a question for you as senior leaders. Is the question that you're really going to answer, can we be on Instagram because do we have enough resources? Or should the question be, should we be on Instagram because it's important that we reach younger demographics? I often think that senior leaders are asking the wrong questions. And I think that's really, really important in terms of thinking about the digital landscape. Citizen journalism is a real thing. It's a term that's almost like an oxymoron, because how can a citizen be a journalist if they're not trained? But it is a phrase that is used widely to describe individuals, members, citizens of countries, of states, of cities, of towns, and of villages who are driving narrative and who are seen as influential. Not all of these people disclose who they are. A lot of them sit behind fake accounts. However, they are still influencing other people. And so what's really, really important is that in order to engage the citizen journalist who has that insatiable appetite for news and information in real time, you need to understand their fears, their questions, and how they are accessing content and who they are listening to. And that's really, really important, because it is my understanding and from experience that when crisis comms in particular is being discussed at a senior level, in boardrooms, at national level or at state level, that the consideration of how news is disseminated online, what hashtags are being used, what fake accounts have been set up, sometimes don't always make the agenda for that meeting. Very often the agenda for the meeting is driven by what do we want to do and how do we want to do it. Whereas I would completely reverse engineer that entire scenario. And the question that I would be asking is, Who is dominating this conversation online right now? What are they saying? And how are citizens responding? Where is the fear coming from? And where are the gaps in information online? And I would be strategically looking at social and at search and getting some data, because the one thing that is impeding great leadership when it comes to digital communications are personal opinions and not data. If you want to make informed decisions about crisis comms or even campaign comms in the digital world, then you need to look at the data and not listen to opinions. Opinions are fine and they're required from people who have lots of experience, but I would like to combine those opinions with the data that's out there. The other thing that's driving and changing the digital landscape right now is the fact that there are 4 tech trends that are disrupting public sector and government communications. And again, this is where we need to ask ourselves another question. Are we utilizing those 4 tech trends that are disrupting comms as we know it? So let's have a look at them. Google said last year that we are only 1% of the way into how technology is going to change our lives, our businesses, and our workplaces. And so the question that senior leaders in government and public sector need to ask themselves is, are we still in the 1%? Are we still operating from a place of behind the curve? Because if we are operating behind the curve, then the Edelman Barometer in 2021, the needle and the dial is not going to move. We're still going to be sitting in the incompetent, unethical quadrant. And that is clearly where we do not need government to be, because this is bad news for all of us. It's bad news for our democracies if they are still there. So let's have a look at those tech trends. Number 1, artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, AI, that's like machine learning. So that's a subset of AI. And that machine learning identifies patterns. So for example, if I was going to study, which I probably will, I'll have a look at later today, the conversations around the coronavirus in Ireland, and I'll be able to find who's dominating those conversations, the keywords and the phrases associated with it, and the accounts that have most activity. How I can do that is I can use a piece of software that leverages machine learning, because it's recognizing patterns in social media and in online conversations that are public. So AI is the first one. Secondly, cloud computing. So many of us had big servers sitting in our offices that held all our data. Now we're beginning to move our information to the cloud. That allows us to be more agile, to share information and files, for example, video files or PDF files or photo files with people remotely and on the go. So there's no excuse to reporting a story back to central office when people are out and about. You can actually work in real time. So actually moving content and information to the cloud is the second trend. The third trend is the adoption of data analytics. Are we looking and reviewing the data relating to the information that we can access from digital? So this is search, this is Google Analytics from web, or these are the social insights from our social networks. There's also third-party data that allows us to engage in, for example, social listening, to a hashtag, or to particular topics that we can monitor. So really understanding the data and how citizens are engaging with you and your content is really, really important. So right now I can imagine that the HSE is experiencing a spike in searches for coronavirus within their internal website, but also in terms of Google as well. I looked at Google Trends on Friday in Ireland, and on Thursday, coronavirus was the second most popular search in Ireland with over 100,000 searches. On Friday, Hand sanitizer was the most searched term in Ireland. So you can see the story that the data is telling us. We need to understand the data because the data is telling us a story about citizen behaviour, and we can understand what they're talking about, how they're feeling, and what they want to know by looking at the data. The final tech trend that is disrupting digital communications for all of us is 4 and 5G connectivity. Remember me saying that the smartphone was the third G in the 3G age? Well, the smartphone and social media use is going to grow. It's going to grow more and faster than ever before because of 4G and 5G connectivity. Okay? It's not going to stop. So conversations about, can we really be digitally agile? Is it going to cost too much money? Is it really that important for us? Again, you're asking the wrong questions. The consumption of content and news and information is going to continue to grow exponentially as 4 and 5G connectivity become the norm. And for example, in Ireland, most of Ireland is now getting 4G connectivity. You add another layer on that, and people will be consuming far more information through their smartphone. So your marketing staff, for me, are the real transformation champions. They are actually engaged in transformation every day, but they need your help. I've been sharing the next slide with public sector marketing pros for about 6 months since I published my book. And I've been saying to marketers and to comm staff, you need to influence up in your organization. You need to be having daily transformation conversations with your colleagues, and you need to impress the importance of it to senior management. So here's an insight into what I've been saying to them. You need to embrace technology. For example, you need to be engaging in social media management tools or software. Doing it manually is not a smart way to work. You have to expand the role of social communications right across the organization and not just having it centralized with social media staff or comm staff, because there's always going to be a roadblock. There's always going to be a roadblock if you try and centralize social comms. Everybody has to play a part in the story that involves them. So for example, in the case of a public health crisis, you're going to have specific experts who are drawn in from different departments. And so while centrally the information might be flowing through your social media team, everybody who has knowledge or understanding of that crisis has to contribute to the content that eventually is going to be shared with the public. Work practices need to change. This is by far one of the single biggest challenges for government agencies right now. They are doing things the old way because they don't know how to do them the new way. You need to completely review and audit work practices because we need to work smarter, not harder. And there's, a misconception that truly embracing digital communications means that we're going to need to double our staff and we're going to have to work twice as hard. This is not the case. Investment has to come, and this investment is a long-term investment in digital transformation, because once you think that you have adequately transformed, the landscape is going to change. It's almost like, if you think about the Green Deal and sustainability, it needs to become a way of life, a way that we deliver our comms in our organization. So you need an investment thinking about training, technology, advertising, and creatives. You're not going to get it right until you get it wrong. And this is where testing and iterating comes into play. It's so important that you test. I can teach all the academia, all the tactics and all the strategies in the world every single day to a government agency. But until they put it into practice and to learn how the public respond, then you're not going to have enough evidence and data in order either to scale it or to iterate. You need to streamline key performance indicators. The whole organization needs to have shared goals and shared visions. You probably have that already, but when you dig down into an organization and you ask a comms team what their key performance indicators are and how they're measuring success, that could be very different to the social media team, to the press team, and to the web team. And potentially those three groups of people aren't even speaking to each other, so they're not on the one page. And then I would go beyond a comms team having shared KPIs to a department having shared KPIs and to an organization having shared KPIs. And this is where you need to develop a new framework, which will then influence new ways of working. Following on from that is that you need to remove silos from organizations. So having like walls built up and not having that kind of horizontal communication. Sometimes it's vertical and it's top down, or it's bottom up. It almost needs to be circular. The flow needs to go around so that those on the ground that are perhaps frontline staff can feed in some vital information from what the public are saying or what they're hearing, and that should influence comms. You need to understand that public sector communications is about changing behavior. And when I met with Facebook recently and I was talking about Facebook and Instagram in the context of government communications, they were surprised at the language that I was using. And I said, but ultimately, what we're trying to do is to change public behavior, whether that's more hand washing, whether that's getting people to register to vote, or whether it's about, having people sign up for a public meeting that's going to impact their local area around a planning decision. You're changing behavior. So you have to share compelling information that is getting to every relevant citizen in a way that they are happy to consume and in a method that they will trust and on a channel that they're hanging out on. Planning for tomorrow is important. So you always need that transformation plan as a live document. So you always should be evolving and transforming. I know it's overwhelming. I know that it's not standing still, but you have to plan for tomorrow. And planning for tomorrow means that today you are changing and you have a goal that's 6 or 12 or 24 months out, and you're saying we will be omni-channel comms in 24 months time. That when we go out with a campaign to engage citizens, it will be on every platform that's relevant, but also we have the ability to create content in real time to reach those people so that they want to engage with us. A really important point is that you need to allow your staff to get it wrong. They're not going to get it right until they get it wrong. And there's a huge fear embedded in comms staff that they should know everything, but yet they're not empowered to know everything, that they're not allowed to fully embrace social media in case they get it wrong. It's so important that you understand the boundaries of your communication in an online capacity. And the only reason you're going to find those boundaries and manage the expectations of the public is when you set out with a full digital first mindset. And so that mindset is really, really important. I want to touch a bit more on silos killing communications, because they absolutely do. You have the old structure of cross-departmental feeding up perhaps to a COO or to a COO or a director in an organization. But that's a singular line of comms, and that is killing what should be really agile, seamless, circular flowing comms. This is a case study that I want you to share internally with your team. And it's from Simon Swan, who used to work in the UK government, and he used to work in the Met Office. And the Met Office actually sat within a UK government department. And he realised that in order for the Met Office to become completely relevant to the public, and they were losing ground to like Google Weather and to other commercial weather interests, that he realized that in order to win the trust and the engagement and to be truly relevant to a digital savvy audience in the UK, they needed to scale digital communications. They needed meteorologists to embrace social media. They needed scientists and researchers to embrace social media and to really understand what the public wanted from them, and not necessarily just the academic or the professional outlook. You see, there's a huge pressure now for government agencies to be able to speak the language of the public. I know you've always been doing it in your traditional comms, but you've been doing it via journalists. But now the public want you to speak to them directly, and they want to be able to hear you, to see you, and this will build trust and transparency. So watch that keynote from the stage at my summit a year and a half ago, and listen to the interview on the podcast. You'll definitely get some great value. And I think it's a really empowering interview and presentation by Simon to see how he sets out the challenges, the hurdles that they had to overcome, but how they did it when they broke down silos and everybody took on the responsibility of being responsible for digital comms. So where do you need to go? So if I said, listen, the blue sky thinking around digital communications is like a wheel. It has a circular flow. And this is what I would like it to look like. And this is what I think it should look like. It's having that ability to be digitally agile, and understanding that you can step in an instant to any social network to command the search results on Google or on YouTube, and to get that information to the public when they need it. So you can see here, this infographic is a diagram showing all the social networks. I probably need to add TikTok to it right now. It includes email and it includes search as well. And that's really breaking down all the tactics that you could be deploying in real time to get information out. And really driving the narrative and commanding social share of voice and owning that conversation. You know, it's only when we get to a stage where the public feel relevance and resonance that trust is going to grow. You will always have the bad actors and the fake news to battle. But the answer is not to do nothing. The answer is to correct the record and to fill the internet with the truth. And yes, it is a massive effort to fill the internet with a lot of content and with truth. But once you change your work practices, once you empower your staff, and once you invest in that knowledge and you insource your story and you don't outsource your story, you really can build that trust up. There are formulas that absolutely work. And Simon Swan's case study is just one example. So from my point of view, the message to senior leadership, and I'd love you to share this webinar around, is that, you know, we have to make the bold decisions. Right now, we don't have to worry about how we're going to implement every single thing. That will come. But the mindset and the culture of being digital first, being digitally agile, and counteracting fake news at a time when trust and transparency is at an all-time low, and we see the rise of citizen journalism, we're real at a crucial point. It's almost like the containment phase. Can we try and contain, that lack of optimism that the public have in government? And so from what we want to see from our leaders, and I think what the public want to see, is people standing up and utilizing social and going live and, answering the tough questions that those bad actors are putting out there. That takes confidence, it takes boldness, but I think it's really, really important that in order to capture the attention and that relevance and resonance of the public, we're going to have to see a different approach than we've seen before, because I think that Edelman Trust Barometer is probably being taken seriously by your organization. So what can you do? What are some takeaways in order to lead from the front? Decide to lead a digital first communications organization. You have to decide it. And that's the very first thing that you need to do. As the decision maker, it lies in your hands. I've been impressing upon public sector marketing pros to influence up, okay? And hopefully you've been feeling the pressure from them. But as a leader and as a decision maker, you must decide. Secondly, you need to understand what are the digital skills within your organization. I have a great line in my book that says, do not fire your staff. Do not push to the side the people that understand public sector communications over many years. Their intuitiveness and their instinctiveness cannot be trained up in a matter of days. But what you can do is you can reward them with 10% of the digital skills that they need to complement that public sector intuitiveness that they have from working in your organization for many years. So do an audit, see what skills are there, and see how you can start insourcing your stories. Prepare a roadmap for transformation. When we set down our goals and align them with KPIs, and we see the different points of success, that will help us visualize how we can get from the starting point to the progress of transformation point and where we need to get to. I would say maximum 24 months because the landscape is changing so much. I mean, a 24-month goal might be to actually have your own internal digital academy where everybody within your organization at some level is experiencing some level of digital communications training. Identify the change team. I would make this a multidisciplinary team. And I would, in a way, make it kind of grade agnostic. I think that you need to bring in staff from all levels of the organization and consider who your change team will be or how other staff can feed into it. Set SMART goals and milestones and have some quick wins that you can grab onto. That would be really, really good. Map a continuing professional development training plan. These digital skills are always changing. They don't necessarily need to be academic. They can be professional development and they can be shared quickly across the organization. Progress reporting is really important to acknowledge how far you've come and to recognize how far you need to go in your transformation roadmap. Produce the case studies from the wins, and I also should say from the losses. Remember, you can only learn when you lose. So make sure that what didn't work well is also mapped, and what worked really well and what you consider to be a win, you need to turn that into a standard operating procedure. Here's how we did it, and here's why we did it, and here's how we will repeat the process in the future. Review and invest in software as a service. There is lots of technology, AI and machine learning based, cloud-based services that can help you work smarter and not harder. Change the work practices. As traditional comms methods, and I know them because I used to operate them, they will not serve you well right now. They're not agile, they're too manual, the time it takes to complete them is too slow, so you miss that real-time edginess of digital comms. And also, they're not scalable. You need processes that are scalable right across the organization, because I can tell you now, there's probably no way that you're going to hire a new digital team or double the staff complement in 24 months. But what you can do is you can create processes combined with technology to scale digital comms within your existing staff base. So these are 10 ways, 10 things that you can do right now to lead from the front and to begin to shift your thinking, your mindset, and your culture from traditional comms into digital first, agile comms. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat box for me. I do have a couple of questions that were sent to me in advance from those who couldn't attend. So let me just have a look. The link is down. I will check that. Thank you for highlighting that to me. I will check that after I finish this webinar. So Rachel had a question for me, and she said, Joanne, I'm a senior leader in a public sector organization. She's sitting at, she said, at a mid-level leadership role. She said she doesn't have the capacity to make the decisions that she wants to make. How can she influence up to her senior leader? So I guess this is a common question that probably a lot of you watching this are going to have. You're not the decision maker, even though you have a leadership role. What I would do is, Rachel, I would actually take your department, your office, whatever area of responsibility that you have right now, and I would actually map out a mini case study of what you believe transformation will achieve from your work, okay? So you take the impetus to actually map out a possible case study. If we scale digital comms beyond my team, what would it look like and what could we achieve? If we invested in software, what old practices would we be replacing and what new results would we be getting? Thirdly, what organizational challenges would it solve and how would it impact either public confidence and or changing public behavior? Then what you've done with that almost mapped out case study is you're presenting a possible pilot project, okay? You're presenting a possible pilot project that you can give to your senior leader and say, I've identified that I could roll out a pilot project, a digital transformation pilot project in my office with my team. Here's what I need to pilot it. The results of which I will share with the whole organization. We will map the processes. We will share the wins. We will share the losses. But in order to do it, I need X investment or X time or the nod from you to say I can do it. And also I need you to impress upon my team that we are going to push ahead with that. So if you're willing to lead from the front and present a possible pilot project, I expect that it would be well received. And that's kind of what we need. It's only when we have evidence of wins that we can actually then prove that transformation is worth its while. So that's the answer to your question, Rachel. Another question from Martin, who says, I am a senior leader in a public sector organization and I have the capacity to make a decision on digital transformation. He says, it's been on my mind for quite a while, but he says what is slowing him down from acting are two things. Number one, he's afraid of the backlash from staff, worried about perhaps them going to HR if new tasks are added to their work description and contractual issues. That's one area. Secondly, it's about time and money. And he feels that digital communications is like a bottomless bucket, that pouring money into it mightn't solve the problem or get the results that you want, and he doesn't know how much he needs to spend. So two great challenges there. Let's go to the first one around people, HR, new work practices, adding new tasks to people's working day. I had somebody from a HR department actually come to one of my recent in-person masterclasses. They came because they were curious, and I had a real light bulb moment. I went, oh my goodness, I need to also speak to HR staff. The whole way through that masterclass, and it was on social media strategy, she actually began to realize how social media could really solve the problems of the organization. She also began to realize how social media was an aid to getting results and to solving problems, and also that it was just a next step in tasks of communications people within the organization. So I think the first thing that you need to do there, Martin, is I think you need to have a conversation with your HR manager or your HR team, and you need to ask them what parameters are they working within in terms of changing job descriptions and contracts. Let's just be clear about this. Social media is communications, and if you work in a communications role, then it's likely it's going to become part of your job. If you're in another role that isn't strictly comms, but there's a communications function. So for example, if I'm an engineer and I have to produce monthly reports on the number of planning permissions that we're getting, or the number of refusals, or, you know, the number of people who've interacted with our helpline, and that's comms, then there are numbers and data to be collected there. So I do believe that it's not a matter of changing job descriptions per se. It's rewriting how we do our work to be relevant in the digital age. So have a conversation with your HR team, and maybe have a conversation with somebody who understands digital and social to see what new tasks need to be added on. The second question in terms of money and how much, and that bottomless bucket that you talk about, a great phrase, I would say that this is where the roadmap comes into play, and where you identify perhaps 6 milestones in 2 years. That's 3 a year. And then when you break it down, you can cost it up. And I would add a percentage of budget to be contingency. But I would make sure that what I'm investing in is practical, tangible, and that I can see results. And it's almost like I would make those milestones like mini pilot projects, because if you do that, you will know what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then you can iterate. So mark your milestones, cost them. And the other thing to say is that budgets are always available. And I would argue that the digital comms budget shouldn't necessarily just come from the comms heading. It might come from another heading where you have a communications challenge or a citizen challenge where comms is the solution. So I think that we can be creative, but I am all about results. I'm all about results, and I would definitely have the investment linked directly to KPIs. And I would set yourself some clear goals over 12 to 24 months. And I would review value for money. I would review the learnings, and I would review what didn't go right. So they were really, really great questions about leading from the front. And can I say that behind all of those questions is much of what's behind the public. It's fear, you know, but fear paralyzes progress. And so it's really, really important that we can step out of the fear and start having the right conversations. And remember what I said at the beginning, you've got to ask the right questions. I fear that senior leaders are asking the wrong questions and maybe not having a broad enough conversation with more than just the same people around the table. So any other questions? If you don't have them now, you can always drop me an email to info@publicsectormarketingpros.com. Also, the book, Public Sector Marketing Pro, which is available on Amazon, answers loads of questions around digital transformation. It's actually the handbook that Public Sector Marketing Pros are using and have on their desk. But I now think that book needs to get into the hands of senior leaders who can influence and make the right decisions. So if you have any more questions, make sure that you get in touch with me. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm JS Talks Digital, or just search for Joanne Sweeney in LinkedIn, and I will certainly come back and answer your questions. Share this link with your colleagues, with senior leaders in your organization, and please, please be the transformation influencers that we need you as members of the public to be. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your questions. And in the meantime, I will see you on social media.